So I'm going to go ahead and get things started with all of that out of the way. I should also start off by introducing myself. I'm Nicole. I'm the breeder community lead here at Good Dog. Thank you all again for being here today, joining us in an entirely new format for our presentation on Humans' Best Friend, the science behind building a better bond with our guest, Dr. Annie Valuska. Dr. Valuska joined us last summer to actually bring an amazing presentation on the science of dog socialization. That was one of my personal favorites from last year. So we're really excited to have her back today, just to share a little bit of a more focused overview on what we're covering. So every dog owner obviously knows that the relationship between dogs and humans is truly unique. I'm sure I don't need to say that to anyone here. But today we're going to dive into the actual science behind that special connection, including the really surprising ways that dogs have adapted to life with humans and practical tips on how to foster stronger connections with dogs and help them reach their full potential. So lots of really cool and exciting things for us to cover today. It's a topic that we haven't really been able to get into at all this year. We've done a lot about reproduction and nutrition, so I'm excited to cover something a little bit new. So with that, I want to thank people who continue to share topic ideas with us and let us know what you'd like to see covered in future webinars, because it really helps us bring these to life. And I would love to thank our partner, Purina Pro Plan, for helping us bring this webinar to life as well. We couldn't do it without them. So please continue sharing suggestions our way. You can add them to the chat now. You can email them to us at breederteam@gooddog.com. Whenever ideas come to you, we always love to hear them. And as I mentioned, we've already hosted a ton of webinars this year. We are pacing around 2 a month. So I just want to remind everyone that you can always find all of the recordings to all of our webinars, not just this year's, but all years past as well, in the Good Breeder Center at the link we just dropped in the chat. This is our Netflix, so to speak, on Good Dog, where we have an entire library of every webinar we've ever done covering a wide range of health topics. So hopefully there's something for everyone. But I just wanted to remind everyone that that's where all of these live once we're not live. So you can watch them whenever, rewatch them, share them with friends, post them in different breeding groups. Those are always there for you. And as I mentioned during the Q&A part of this presentation, we have some previously submitted questions that we're going to prioritize first. But of course, if you have questions throughout the entire webinar, just use the chat, as I see people already doing, to ask away. And we're going to do our best to answer those as well. I want to share a little bit about Good Dog for anyone who's new here and joining us for the first time. Good Dog is on a mission to build a better world for our dogs and the people who love them by advocating for dog breeders like yourselves, educating the public, and promoting canine health and responsible dog ownership. We are a secure online community that is created just for responsible dog breeders to connect with Good Dog applicants from all across the country to find forever homes for your puppies. We use the power of technology to help breeders run their breeding program seamlessly from start to finish, with tools like our software to post your available litters, connect with buyers from across the country, get payments securely, and all of those smaller details that happen in between your litter of puppies being born to going off to their new homes. We're here to support you every step of the way in that. And then we also have a number of free educational resources, online classes, and health-related discounts to also help your programs thrive in all other ways as well. So if you're not yet a member of our community, you can always apply to join us at gooddog.com/join, which we just dropped into the chat as well. I'll share a reminder about that at the end of the webinar. And again, if you have questions just about joining our community, please reach out to breederteam@gooddog.com and someone will happily answer those for you. And before I pass things over to Dr. Valuska, I just want to share a little bit about her background in canine health. Dr. Valuska brings over 20 years of animal behavior experience to her role as principal scientist on Purina's pet behavior team. After receiving her doctorate degree in animal behavior from the University of California, Davis, Dr. Valuska went on to serve as the postdoctoral behavior research fellow at Disney's Animal Kingdom before joining Purina in 2013, which I have to say is one of my favorite fun facts about any of our speakers ever. I think that is just so cool. Since then, Dr. Valuska has used her expertise to serve as the voice of the pet, ensuring that the needs of dogs are kept top of mind in all of Purina's products and outreach efforts. She's frequently interviewed for podcasts, TV news stories, newspaper articles, and can also be found on TikTok and Instagram. We're going to drop her handle in the chat now. It's at Annie Knows Animals. You can all follow her there. And with that, I'm going to pass things over to you, Dr. Valuska, to get things started.
All right, thank you so much. We'll dive right in because I'm probably going to fill most of the hour with this information. Lots of science to share. So yes, today is all about the bond, and I wanted to start by making sure that we're all on the same page about what that is, using this definition from AVMA. And I've highlighted what are, in my opinion, the key elements of this definition and what will really form the backbone of this talk. So number one, this is about a relationship between us and our dogs. And number two, in order for that relationship or that bond to be successful, it needs to take into account both ends of the leash and offer a benefit both to us and to our dogs. And I would argue that one of the biggest challenges when it comes to our relationship with our dogs is not that different from the challenges that we face in other relationships with our partners or our friends or our coworkers. And that challenge is communication. So for the rest of the talk, I'm really going to be focusing on that communication. And to do that, I'm going to make sure you fully understand who our target audience is, what are dogs. I'm going to talk about the signals that people send. I'm going to talk about the signals that our dogs send, and then I'll wrap up with some more pointed tips for how to make the most of that bond and improve our relationship with our dogs. So, how did we get here? Now, this is a picture of a gray wolf. Dogs, of course, are not wolves, but they are each other's closest living relative, and they share a common ancestor. But it's hypothesized that the split from that common ancestor, where one branch evolved into dogs and the other branch evolved into wolves, modern wolves, happened about 40,000 years ago. A lot can happen in that 40,000 years, and it wasn't until about 14,000 years ago that the process of domestication started. And it's this process that ultimately led to the modern dogs that we know and love today. Let's talk a little bit about domestication. This could be a whole other talk, but I'll try to be brief. So domestication is often confused with the process of taming or socializing an animal, which can happen even with a wild animal that is not genetically domesticated. So if you were to find, lucky you, a newborn wolf puppy and take it in and raise it, and that wolf becomes comfortable living with you and your family, that specific wolf is now tame or socialized, but neither that wolf nor wolves as a species is domesticated. So taming or socializing is a process of changing an individual's behavior that happens across their lifespan. Domestication is a genetic process that occurs at the species level. So all dogs are domesticated genetically. Some of them are more well socialized than others and live as pets. Unfortunately, the majority of dogs in the world are not as well socialized and are considered feral. But no matter what their individual behavior is, they are all genetically domesticated. And sometimes humans domesticate animals on purpose, like we did with cows and pigs, for example, and sometimes animals domesticate themselves. And that is the leading theory right now for what happened with dogs. And scientists believe that this happened because humans had a lot of resources, which mostly involves our food, that dogs' ancestors wanted access to. And a few of those proto-dogs were brave enough or sociable enough to approach those humans to try to get that food. And necessarily, at least a few of our human ancestors allowed that or maybe even encouraged that to happen. Those proto-dogs benefited by getting access to our resources, and so they were able to survive longer and produce more puppies than other dogs. And those puppies also carried those sociable genes, and they then pass those on to their offspring. And after many generations of that, you end up with the domesticated dog. So the behavior of those proto-dogs is what drove the change. They were less fearful, they were more bold, they were easier to socialize, but for reasons that are frankly not super well understood, those behavioral traits are genetically linked to physical traits. And that is something known as domestication syndrome. And as a result, domesticated animals of all species are not only friendlier and less fearful, but they also have changes like floppy ears, spotted coats, curly tails, shorter, flatter muzzles and faces, larger eyes. And all of those changes, both the behavioral changes and these physical changes, are connected because they resemble the traits of a young animal. This is known as neoteny, and that's basically what domestication has done for dogs. It has pulled the traits and characteristics of puppyhood well into adulthood for our pets. That's why dogs will play even well into their senior years, for example, when play in wolves drops significantly after puppyhood. And that process of neoteny and domestication has also lengthened the window when dogs can be socialized to humans. In wolves, if they haven't had human exposure within that first 4 weeks of life, it's pretty much impossible to tame them. For dogs, that window of socialization has lengthened to 4 months. And I talk all about that in the webinar I gave last year. So feel free to look that up if you want more information about socialization. So anyway, when you can't shake the sense that your adult dog is just a baby, genetically, you are absolutely right. You are not far off there. Now, up until this point, what I've said about domestication applies to pretty much all domesticated species. But dogs are kind of the overachievers of domestication syndrome because some changes have happened with dogs that we just haven't seen in any other species. So let's talk about those changes. One of them is responsible for this adorable puppy dog eye expression that you can see this puppy making. So the muscles that are responsible for raising that inner eyebrow is present in dogs, but it is not present in wolves. And because dogs have that muscle, that allows them to make that adorable little puppy dog expression. And they also have well-developed muscles around their eye that allow them to widen them enough to show the white. And they use these muscles much more often than wolves do. And they seem to be using them with intention. One study that looked at this found that dogs make this puppy dog eye facial expression much more often when a human is looking at them compared to when a human is present but is looking away. So dogs definitely know that this puppy dog eye expression can have an impact on us. And we've explored that from the human side too. This study on the screen found that dogs that were making that puppy dog eye expression were rated as more adoptable than dogs that were not making that expression. So this seemingly very minor change absolutely has an impact on us, how we perceive those dogs, and their relationship with us. Another key change that has occurred throughout domestication in dogs is that they are much, much better than wolves at following our pointing gestures, especially as puppies. Adult wolves can catch up if they are extremely heavily socialized, but dogs are attuned to humans from a very young age. And perhaps an even bigger difference between dogs and wolves is in their willingness to make eye contact with humans and follow the direction of our gaze. Wolves are not very good at this, even when they've been heavily socialized. But again, dogs seem to just naturally pay attention to where we're looking as long as they have some experience with people. And this willingness to kind of flout canine social norms and hold eye contact with a familiar person is linked to special change number 3, which is the oxytocin loop. So oxytocin is known as the love hormone or the cuddle hormone. It's what's released when a mother is looking at her newborn baby or when two people who are in love are looking into each other's eyes. And it is also released when we are looking into the eyes of our dogs. What I think is really cool is not only is it released in humans when this happens, but it is released in our dogs as well. So those warm, fuzzy feelings you get when you're looking at your pet, it's likely the dogs are experiencing something similar. So again, all these changes combined speak to just how naturally attuned we are to each other and how genetically and through the course of evolution, we have been set up to have this very close relationship with our dogs. Okay, so at this point, I've hopefully convinced you that dogs are not wolves. There have been some significant changes along the way that have mostly served to orient dogs more towards people. But both dogs and wolves still have that genetic backbone of a social hunter. One could argue that now pet dogs' primary pack members are humans instead of other dogs. So I do want to spend some time talking about what wolf social structure looks like. There is this very common misconception that wolves live in packs with a very linear dominance hierarchy, and that hierarchy is maintained by control and authority and aggression. But it turns out that idea is just flat out wrong. It is so wrong that the studies and scientific papers that were done that generated that theory of the alpha dog have since been officially retracted. So that research was done on unfamiliar, unrelated adult wolves that were living together in a very confined space, so very unnatural conditions. And under those unnatural conditions, yes, you do get a pretty linear dominance hierarchy and lots of aggression. But when scientists finally got around to studying wolves in their natural environment, it turns out that those packs are really just families. And the quote unquote alpha animals were the parents, living with a few years worth of their puppies. So, like all good parents, the wolf parents were in charge and they were setting boundaries for their offspring and teaching them how to wolf, fear-based or aggression-based dominance relationship, like many people believe. So, scientifically, there is absolutely no basis for this idea that a dog needs to fear you in order to perform for you. And in fact, there's mounting evidence that the opposite is true, that if the dog does fear you, that can really negatively impact both their performance and your overall relationship. So we're going to get into some of those studies later, but for now, let's get back to talking about the communication that builds our relationship with dogs. And we'll start with the human side of the equation and the signals that we give dogs. So I already mentioned that they are paying attention to our gaze, and this launched a trend where people pretended to sleep. So the man in this video is sitting there with his eyes closed, pretending to sleep with food in his hand and filming to see what the dogs would do. So you can see a great example of those puppy dog eyes. The dog has realized the person is not looking at him, and so very stealthily tries to take the food out of his hand. So it turned out that trend was really onto something. Dogs are very tuned in, not only to what we can see, but also what we can hear. And this study on the screen explored that question by asking dogs, first, not to take a favorite treat that had been left on a plate by their owner for 5 minutes. This is called an inhibition task. So it sets the tone that the dog is kind of not supposed to have this food. And after that, the dog officially entered the experiment. So these dogs in the experiment were leashed by their owner, and they would watch the experimenter place a treat under either a noisy container, which had a row of bells on it that jingled whenever you moved the container, or a quiet container that was identical except that the little ringers inside the bells had been removed. So as the experimenter was placing the treat, they would move the container so the dog knew whether it was noisy or quiet. Then the experimenter would either sit facing straight ahead looking at the dog, so this was the looking condition, or the experimenter would sit and place their head between their knees so they could not see the dog. This was the not looking condition. And dogs were then released by their owner, and the container that they approached first was measured. And the study found that dogs were much more likely to approach the quiet container in the not looking condition. However, there was no preference for the quiet or noisy container in the looking condition. So the authors concluded that, quote, this suggests dogs took into account the noise caused by their approach only when that noise could change what the experimenter knew about their actions. So going back to that food thief video, the results from this study suggest that the dog in that video and many others that have been made like it understood that the human couldn't see the dog's approach, and therefore they would be able to successfully steal the food. And the silence with which the dog attempted to take the sandwich also likely reflects that they understand that too much noise would have alerted the human. So really cute, funny videos that are actually demonstrating a pretty sophisticated awareness in dogs of what we're seeing and hearing and what that means for them. So they're clearly paying attention to where we're looking and how much noise they're making. They're also paying attention to what our faces look like, what facial expression we have. So many studies, this is just one of them, have found that dogs can not only discriminate between different human facial expressions and match the facial expression to a corresponding sound. So they seem to understand what's called the valence of the emotion, that a smiling face is associated with good stuff and an angry face is associated with more scary stuff. But other studies have found that they actually change their own behavior depending on what facial expression they're seeing on us. So in this particular study, scientists were looking at lip licking in dogs, and this is a stress behavior. So they wanted to see how frequently dogs lip licked in response to either smiling or angry human faces. You could see the stimuli here. And as predicted, dogs displayed more of that stress behavior, more lip licking, in response to the angry faces than the smiling faces. And this research has also been backed up by studies that have looked not only at stress behavior, but physiological measures of stress, like heart rate or cortisol. So again, dogs are paying attention to what our faces are doing. They understand what those facial expressions mean, and they're changing their behavior as a result. Dogs' tendency to change their behavior in response to others' behavior is something known as social referencing, and dogs do this a lot. This study found that they are particularly sensitive to our positive emotions. And they studied this by presenting a dog with two boxes, and the owner would go up to one box and make a big fuss, big smile, excited tone of voice, and then the owner would walk up to another box and act like they were very frightened of what was in that box. And then they would release the dog and let the dog investigate one or both of them. And what they found was that in this particular paradigm, when those dogs were released, they were much more likely to explore the box that the owner had been excited about, to see if it was a matter of preferring the stimulus that elicited happiness, or maybe dogs were just trying to avoid the stimulus that made the owners scared. They ran some additional studies. So one compared a positive reaction versus a neutral reaction, and one compared a fearful reaction versus a neutral reaction. And dogs were significantly more likely to choose the positive box compared to the neutral box. So this supported that, yeah, they liked that their owner was happy about something and they wanted to see what it was. There was no difference between the neutral box and the scared box. So they don't seem to be as sensitive to those negative emotions in this case, but they're highly tuned into our positive emotions. Perhaps because this is a very optimistic interpretation, but maybe they're just more familiar with our positive emotions. Maybe they see us smiling more often than they see us afraid, for example. Other studies have found that dogs will override their own information about where food is or their own preferences in order to follow their owner's cues. So, for example, this study assessed whether dogs preferred a bowl with more food or a bowl with less food. And as I'm sure everyone in this audience, as anyone who is remotely familiar with dogs could tell you, dogs on their own tend to pick the bowl with more food over the bowl with less food. Then they had the owner come in and act really excited over the bowl with less food and then let the dogs choose. And in those studies, they found that the dogs were more likely to choose the bowl with less food than they were in the previous studies. And when both bowls had the same amount of food, they almost always picked the bowl that the owner acted excited over. So they are very, very attuned to what we are thinking about, what we're excited about. And again, that can drive their behavior. And the ways owners expressed excitement in this study included that smiling facial expression we've already talked about, but also the words they were using and their tone of voice. So let's talk about how sensitive dogs are to what we're saying. It turns out that the way people talk to dogs is so consistent that it can be studied under the umbrella of dog-directed speech, which is, interestingly, fundamentally different from both infant-directed speech, how we talk to human babies, and adult-directed speech. So dog-directed speech shares some features of infant-directed speech, like elevated pitch and exaggerated affect compared to adult-directed speech, and humans will produce dog-directed speech spontaneously for dogs of all ages. And good news for those of you that use this language, we are not just babbling for no reason. Dogs can tell the difference between dog-directed speech and adult-directed speech, and they prefer humans that use dog-directed speech compared to humans that use adult-directed speech. And this study found that dog-directed speech is appealing to dogs, not just because of those changes in pitch and tone that I mentioned, but also because we tend to use words that we know are really meaningful to dogs, like walk or treat. And they assessed this by taking scripts of typical dog-directed speech and typical adult-directed speech, and they recorded some of them with that cadence. So for example, this dog-directed speech with script with dog-directed speech cadence would sound like, "Oh, you're such a good dog. Yes, you are," right? That's how we talk to dogs. And then this is the adult-directed speech, adult-directed cadence would sound like, "I had a massive meltdown with my lit survey last night." Then they recorded 2 more pieces of audio where they swapped the cadence. So people were reading the dog-directed script like normal. Oh, you're such a good dog. Yes, you are, right? And in my opinion, the funnier one is reading this adult-directed script with the dog-directed cadence. So I had a massive meltdown last night. So if you can listen to the recordings on supplemental material, they're pretty funny. And dogs did not like the swap. It has to be the combination of the cadence and the script to be really effective at getting dogs' attention. So that was kind of interesting. And using dog-directed speech not only makes us more appealing to dogs, talking to dogs like that can improve their responsiveness in a training session. And this paper found that using a friendly voice during dog training also results in significantly better performance during training and more positive emotional responses in dogs. That same study also found that the more time a trainer spent using scolding speech, the fewer correct responses the dog made during training. So again, our dogs are paying very close attention to our signals, and they are changing their behavior in response to them. You may also be picking up on a pattern here that dogs have better and stronger responses to positive stimuli than negative stimuli. We'll touch on that a bit later. So far, I've focused on specific signals like our facial expressions or our speech, but dogs are also paying attention to our overall body language and behavior. And some great examples of this have been highlighted in these viral videos of the pause in trend, where people would put their hands in and spontaneously dogs would offer matching behavior. Uh, and they have done studies on this. This is called this is called dog imitation learning. So studies on this imitation learning have found that dogs can master a detour task after watching a single human demonstration. So after just seeing the person take one kind of wonky path, the dog tend to follow the demo, even when a much simpler, more direct route is available to them. So this suggests that dogs may be biased towards using this socially acquired information over doing their own trial and error learning, and may even be predisposed to just copy humans. And dogs have a tendency to copy us even when our behavior is completely meaningless. One study found that when owners made aimless detours on the way back into their homes after taking a walk, dogs gradually developed the similar habit, even without any sort of acknowledgement or encouragement by the owner. And even when people stopped taking the detour and would take the more direct route, dogs would persist in taking that detour, even though the owner was no longer doing them. This tendency has evolved into a do as I do training method that I think is really cool. And some studies have suggested that this training method may be even more effective in teaching new behaviors than clicker training. So let's take a look at a video example of this do as I do method. So the cue is do as I do, or copy, or whatever it may be. And the dog learns that that means do whatever the human just did. So these are behaviors the dog has never done before, has never seen demonstrated before, and you'll see that this dog is incredibly good at mimicking what the human showed. So we saw her look in the bucket. Now we're going to see her ring the bell with her head. All in the kind of the sky is the limit. As long as the dog is physically capable of doing it, if the dog has learned this do as I do cue and the human is able to effectively engage in the behavior, the dog is quite good at mimicking it. So really cool work being done in this space. So I think I've presented a fair amount of evidence that dogs are very good at reading us. They are certainly holding up their end of the bargain when it comes to the bond. But how are us humans doing? Well, it turns out not so great. Even though most dog owners believe they are very good at reading canine body language, study after study after study has found that that is not actually true. And in this particular study, non-dog owners were better at classifying the emotional states of dogs than dog owners were. And this was particularly true when it came to identifying fear and anxiety during a dog's interaction with a child. This led the authors of this study to conclude that experience with dog ownership gives people confidence, but without theoretical knowledge to back it up, that confidence is actually a detriment. So let's provide you with some of that theoretical knowledge so you are empowered to understand the signals that your dog is sending to you. And I covered some of this in my first webinar, so I'll breeze through a few of these slides and do a deeper dive on others. So here you can see some examples of passive submission. These behaviors often indicate that the dog may be feeling anxious or uncomfortable in the situation or environment. So you may notice a lot of tension in your dog's body when they're feeling this way, especially around the face and eyes, which can result in this exaggerated whale eye expression where the white is highly visible. The dog is often trying to make themselves look smaller, so their head or tail may be tucked in, that the ears may be pinned back. If the teeth are showing and the eyes are closed, like you can see in this example photo, that is a submissive signal, and it's likely the dog is trying to avoid being punished. You often see this played for laughs in viral videos where someone gets home and the pillow's been destroyed or the trash is tipped over, and they're acting as if the dog is grinning over what they did, but this is actually a submissive signal, and it's likely the dog is experiencing discomfort or even some fear. Other signs your dog is feeling uncomfortable include excessive panting, excessive yawning, standing there with one paw lifted, shivering, and lip licking, which I talked about a little bit earlier. So if you see these behaviors, it's always a good idea to try to remove your dog from that situation to make them more comfortable. So this is passive submission. Dogs can also demonstrate active submission. So I like to think about passive submission as the dog trying not to be perceived. They don't want to be seen. Active submission is more like the dog trying to get your attention to prove how friendly and nice they are. So here you're looking for very confident, loose body language. They are taking up a lot of space. That head is up, the ears are up, everything is soft and relaxed, and often that tail may be wagging. But tail wagging is probably one of the most widely misunderstood dog behaviors there is. I think because people believe it's easy to observe, so it's also easy to interpret. Many of us take a dog's wagging tail for granted. It's actually a pretty complex and evolutionarily interesting behavior. The truth is, we don't fully understand how tail wagging evolved. For example, whether it's kind of an accident of domestication syndrome or something that humans might have intentionally selected for because it is so easy to see. But we do know that tail wagging is special because dogs wag their tails more than any other canid species. One thing you might think you know about a wagging tail is that it means a dog is happy or friendly, but that is absolutely not true. In fact, one study found that dogs that behaved aggressively in a test situation were more likely to have been wagging their tails than dogs that didn't behave aggressively. So if a dog is wagging his tail, all it means is that something has his attention. This could be a person, another dog, or even an object. In order to decode how the dog feels about what has his attention, you need to tune in to his body language. So a low sweeping tail, like the dog on the left here, that is a happy dog. That is an appeasement or affiliative signal towards other dogs and people. This is often accompanied by very loose body language and nice, relaxed eyes, ears, and mouth. You can contrast this with the dog on the right. This is a rapidly wagging tail that is held high above the back. It's not a loose wag, it's very stiff and focused movement, and the rest of that dog's body is incredibly tense. This type of wagging is called flagging, and this is likely the kind of wagging that preceded the aggressive interactions in the other study I talked about. So this is not a dog that is communicating friendly intent. The dog certainly is paying attention to that other dog, but that wagging tail does not mean that they're happy about it. That is not a friendly behavior. Another more subtle and, in my opinion, super interesting cue that you can use when you're looking at a wagging tail is the directionality of the tail wag. So is it wagging more on the left or the right of the dog's body? So which of these two dogs looks happier to you? Play them again because those are quick videos. So you can see one tail wag. The video on the left is leaning more towards the dog's left. The video on the right is leaning more towards the dog's right. So if you said, just kind of gut reaction, the dog on the right side of the screen looks happier, You are correct. Dogs are more likely to wag their tails toward their right if they're looking at something they like, and they're more likely to wag their tails more biased towards their left when they're looking at something negative. And this may seem like an extremely subtle behavior to us, and it is very difficult to pick up on. But dogs can actually tell the difference when looking at other dogs, and they show more signs of stress when they are watching videos of left biased wagging dogs compared to videos of right biased wagging dogs. So I think just a good reminder that even though we might not be great at picking up on some of these signals, the dogs are still communicating very clearly how they're feeling. It's also important to be able to recognize when tensions may be escalating through some of these more dominant or aggressive signals. So here you're going to be looking for very hard, direct eye contact, especially when that's accompanied by bared teeth or vocalizations like barking or growling. Here, it's kind of the opposite of that active submission. You've got a lot of tension in the face and body here. You might see dogs trying to make themselves appear larger than they actually are, leaning forward. You might have the fur on the back of their neck standing up. That tail will be held over their body. You may also see some more air snapping or even biting behavior in these situations. So if you see these signals from your dog, it's very important to remove them from the situation to allow them to calm down and not to punish them. When you punish the warning signals, normal dog communication, dogs, you think you're teaching them not to feel that way about the situation, but what you're actually teaching them is not to communicate that they feel that way. And that's often how you end up with a dog that starts skipping the warning and instead goes straight to a bite in order to get the space that they need. All right, time for a quick pop quiz. So I'm going to show you 3 videos. Each video is the behavior directly before either a play session, a neutral encounter, or a fight. So let's see if you can predict which is which. Play that again. Is that leading up to play, a fight, or a neutral encounter? So this session ended in play. Both dogs have very relaxed body language. Saw a bit of a body shake there. That's very common in play. They're both engaged with each other and just kind of loose and bouncy. So these two ended up playing together. How about this one? Play, neutral, or a fight? One more time. This one throws people because of the water bowl. They assume that there's about to be a fight over resource guarding, but this one led to a neutral interaction. Both dogs are relaxed. They're not terribly tuned in to each other. They just went their separate ways. And finally, how does this one end? Play it one more time. This one ends in a fight. And it's a little confusing because the all black dog, I think, wants to play. It does a play bow. It seems to really want to engage the black and white dog, but it is being very rude in dog body language. And the black and white dog is giving very clear signals that they're not enjoying it. There's tension. They are making direct eye contact, that tail's above the back. And this ended up escalating to an aggressive encounter. All right, that's dog-dog signaling. Let's up the challenge a little bit. I'm going to show you some of the most popular dog videos on the internet from 2024, and I want you to tell me if you think the dogs in these videos look happy and comfortable. Okay. If you said you thought the dogs were calm or even happy, you certainly would not be alone. As I've shared, people aren't great at interpreting canine behavior, especially when kids are involved. And These videos are interesting because the clues about how the dogs are feeling are coming from what's called a calming signal. These calming signals are also known as appeasement behaviors, and they generally indicate that a dog is feeling stressed and is asking for space. So here's a list of the calming signals that dogs use. It's important to keep in mind that if a dog is stressed, you will almost never see just one of these signals in isolation. Dogs will be displaying several of these, plus some of the other body language that we've already talked about. But because many of them are so subtle and so quick, it's good to keep the entire list in mind so that you don't miss anything. And in case you haven't guessed, those 3 videos all showed dogs that were stressed and displaying calming signals. And in fact, in a survey of hundreds of the most popular videos showing dogs and people interacting, the majority of those videos showed stress behavior in the dogs. And the authors of the study noted that instead of responding appropriately to the dog's requests to stop and understanding that the dogs were scared or confused, people usually find these calming signals funny or even indicative of dog enjoyment. Dogs were significantly more likely to be displaying stress behavior in videos with children, which is consistent with prior research showing that children are more likely to be the victims of dog bites than adults. And prior to being bitten, those children were reported to have been engaging in behaviors that included petting, hugging, kissing, stepping on, pulling on, hitting, and interfering with a resting dog. And this study concluded, quote, "Our studies show a lack of awareness of the meaning or interpretation of canine signaling and communicative behaviors. Humans need to understand and recognize communication exhibited by their dogs, to respect it, respond appropriately, and to respect agency in human-dog interactions." So with that directive in mind, I'm going to show you these videos again, highlighting the calming signals that the dogs are giving, indicating that they are uncomfortable with the interactions. Okay. All right. We have covered a lot of ground about human and dog communication. So certainly understanding the signals that you are sending, even if you're not intending to, and the signals your dog is sending will go a long way towards improving your relationship. Now, let's spend the last few minutes going over some additional practical tips for building that bond. I'll cover a few more on the next slide, but if I had to sum it up in one sentence, I would advise you to aim for an authoritative pet parenting style. So this study on the screen looked at dog parenting style and how it affected things like sociability, so how oriented they were towards people, attachment, so the pet-parent relationship, and problem-solving ability, which is a measure of cognition, so how smart essentially the dogs are. And this study categorized pet owners as either authoritative, authoritarian, or permissive. So authoritative parents, what you should be aiming for, had high expectations and high responsiveness. So these are pet owners that have rules, they have boundaries, they have expectations for their dogs, but they also accept that the dogs for who they are, and they're very in tune with their dog's needs. And they respect that the dog even has independent needs as a dog. That's authoritative. Authoritarian pet parents had high expectations, but low responsiveness. They value obedience, tradition, and order, regardless of the dog's own needs. The dog's needs don't matter. They just need to do what they're told. And permissive pet parents have low expectations and low responsiveness. These are pet parents that just let the dog do whatever they want, no rules, but also not a lot of dog-centered attention. Many people who believe their dog needs that dominant alpha figure fall into the authoritarian style. And I've already discussed why that isn't backed by science. And this study just really reinforces that. So what they found was that dogs of authoritative owners had the highest rate of secure attachment. The dogs were highly social and attuned to people, and the dogs were more persistent and successful on the problem-solving task than dogs with authoritarian or dogs with permissive owners. And in fact, Only dogs of authoritative owners actually solved the task. So a lot of evidence that this is really the way to go if what you're after is a well-socialized, well-bonded, cognitively enhanced dog. So how do you get to embody that style? Here are my quick tips. So I hope, if nothing else, I have convinced you that you are always communicating with your dog. They are paying a lot of attention to you. And with that power comes a lot of responsibility. That means you have to be really careful in what you're communicating and very intentional. I get a lot of people coming to me saying things like, oh, my dog won't stop barking to get my attention. My dog will only eat if I hand feed him kibble by kibble. My dog jumps up when I walk in the room. And my first question is always, well, what do you do when your dog does that? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is, well, I give the dog attention, or I hand feed them their kibble, or whatever the behavior they're trying to stop is, they reward it with attention. So it's important to be really mindful of how you're engaging with your dog and be very aware of what a reward looks like to your pet. You want to make sure that you are rewarding what you want to see repeated and not reward what you don't want to see repeated. Authoritative pet parenting does not mean no boundaries, no rules, no expectations, but it does require very clear boundaries and expectations. And of course, your dog is also communicating, so ensure that you're taking time to read and respond to their signals appropriately. Tip number 2 is try not to say no to your dog without saying yes. And this, once you get into the habit, you'll find that it's a lot easier to say yes than it is to say no. In general, I think this is a good reminder to try as much as possible to keep things in that positive space for your pet. It is possible, and in many ways, it's better to change behavior entirely through positive reinforcement and pleasant interactions. And this is also going to be better for your bond long term. So in the example of jumping up to greet people, instead of just working on a no for the jump, instead train a really strong sit. You can say yes to the sit instead of saying no to the jump. And sometimes finding that yes really requires you to think like your dog and understand to meet with that problem behavior. This is another hallmark of the authoritative style, leaving room for dogs to have their own needs. For example, I recently helped a client that really didn't want their dog going in the pool anymore. And that involved not only setting boundaries around the pool, so saying no to the pool, but also providing a smaller kiddie pool in the yard that the dog could have access to. This made it a lot easier to teach the dog to stay out of the human pool because that dog's needs for some fun in the water were still being met in this alternative way. Tip number 4, be the source of all good things. If you are associated with things the dog loves, so fun play sessions, meal times, treats, walks, their favorite toys, eventually their brain will trick them into thinking that they like you, whether they want to or not. This is a process called associative learning. You can also think of this phrase as only good things within reason. So while some stressful stuff is unavoidable, again, trying to stay away from negative associations, like using aversive training methods or punishment, will also be really important in maintaining your bond. So important, tip number 5, no punishment. And I think a hard lesson for a lot of people to remember is that punishment is in the eye of the beholder. It's what your dog considers punishment. The impact matters, not your intent. That means that punishment is not just shot collars and spray bottles, but it can be as subtle as staring a dog down or raising your voice. One study found that dog obedience was positively correlated with the number of tasks they were trained on using rewards, but not punishment. And other studies have found that punishment-based training methods are associated with higher levels of aggression in dogs, higher stress levels during training sessions, a general negative mood state in dogs, and an increased incidence of overall problem behaviors. Even play sessions can turn into something stressful if you're using control, authority, or aggression during that play. Dogs are really sensitive to punishment, and it has such a negative overall impact on our relationships with them and their behavior, obedience, and well-being in general. So really try to avoid punishment. Tip 6, schedule time to bond. And I know this one sounds a little silly, but I promise you it is a real tip. There are so many studies showing how much animals, not just dogs, animals in general, benefit from routine and predictability and control over their environment. And putting things on a predictable schedule can make such a difference. There are also so many studies showing the benefit of spending time, a short amount of time, 5 to 15 minutes a day, of focused time, petting and really in tune with your dog when it comes to their well-being, stress levels, trainability, and your bond. So putting those special 5 to 15 minutes on some sort of predictable schedule is only going to amplify those benefits. So turn off the TV, put down your phone, and commit to just focusing on your dog just for a few minutes every day, ideally at the same time every day. I challenge you to do this for 7 days and see what a big difference such a small thing can make. And finally, last tip, a tired dog is a happy dog. And by that, I don't just mean tired physically. Dogs need to work their brains and their noses too. So in addition to the regular exercise they should be getting, taking dogs on snifaris, where it doesn't matter if they're in the same spot for the whole 20 minutes, sniffing the bush, that's what they want to do. That's what they can do. Incorporating olfactory enrichment into their routine and feeding them out of snuffle mats or puzzle feeders on a regular basis. Just letting them be a dog and use their nose and use their brains can really make a big difference in their overall well-being. And the better they're feeling, the better your relationship is going to be. So that's all I've got. There's a QR codes to my social channels where I talk about all this kind of stuff and more. And looks like we have a few minutes left. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. We do have some questions. They're all kind of in the same vein, though, and kind of broken up by life stage or, age of the puppy, if you will. So I'll ask it, if you don't mind, in kind of one combined question, and if you feel free to break it down. But people were asking for recommendations as it pertains to whether it be epigenetics or what to look for in choosing breeding stock to strengthen, that human dog bond. Then what the breeders can do at home before the pup goes, and things to look out for and focus on there. And then finally, what they can do to set up their new owners for success with, and any recommendations that they can have for them relating to
Yes.
human dog bond.
So I'll tackle the second part first. That's the easiest one because I will just encourage you to go and find my other webinar from a year ago. I think if you search socialization Annie Valuska, it should come up. But I spend the entire hour covering just that, like step-by-step routines and things to know when it comes to socializing those very young puppies to set them up for success. So tons of information I've already put out there for that question. The first was evaluating breeding stock. So I think that some of the behaviors that I covered in this deck can be useful. So essentially looking at how attuned those dogs are to people, how naturally drawn they are to you and your family members, how well they are paying attention to things like pointing. And these are the kinds of little mini studies you can just do in your living room or in your backyard, where you hide a treat under a cup and then stand up and point to it and see if the dog is willing to follow your point. Definitely not to say that a dog that won't follow your point is a bad breeding stock, but I think there are exercises like this, now that you know the kinds of things dogs are paying attention to, that you can do at home to see whether these dogs are tuning into you or not, and just how naturally drawn they are to people. So I think from a temperament perspective, when it comes to setting dogs up to be really closely bonded to people, those are the kinds of behaviors that I would be interested in. And then the third question, ways to prepare the owners for this. I think just sharing information. We've spent an hour talking about this. I could talk about it for another 10 hours, but I think just letting owners know that these kinds of resources and information is out there. And I think so many people think they're familiar with what it means to own a dog, and they just don't know what they don't know. So I think just planting the seed that, hey, there's more subtle body language than you might have realized. Hey, dogs actually require a lot more enrichment. There's more to it than just walks and potty breaks and food. I think just at least sparking the curiosity in owners and maybe guiding them towards a few reputable websites, or talks like this one, or social media accounts like mine. There's lots of other experts doing similar things out there. But I think just sparking that curiosity and letting them know that there's way more information out there than they might have realized can be a good first step.
Yeah, incredible. Fantastic advice. Nicole, I'll turn it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you for such an amazing presentation. And the one that you mentioned about the science of dog socialization, I just want to call out for everyone watching that we just dropped the link to that in the chat. So please, everyone, take a look at that once this is over, because there's lots of great information there as well. Let me just grab our schedule to make sure I give everyone the right information about our next webinar. So thank you all so much for being here and for joining us for another Good Breeder webinar, and to Purina for helping us bring events like this to life. And of course, you, Dr. Valuska, for this incredible presentation. And as I mentioned, if you're not yet part of our community, please apply to join at gooddog.com/join so you can stay up to date on all of our future webinars and exclusive events. And I know I mentioned this at the beginning of this webinar, but we are going to be keeping everyone updated about whether our next webinar will be on Zoom or Facebook Live, but our fingers are crossed that we figure out those issues soon so we can get back to Facebook Live, because I know everyone loves that format. And to leave everyone with a sneak peek of our next webinar, it'll be Canine Cancer from a Breeder's Perspective with Dr. Victor J. Stora, who I do not believe has ever done a presentation for us yet, so we're really excited to welcome him. And that will be on Wednesday, June 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So coming up very soon, we're going to announce all of that very shortly later this week, so everyone can register in time, and we'll send out lots of reminders in the meantime. But until then, thank you all so much for being here and for joining us for another webinar, and we will see you at our next one. Thank you, everyone. Bye.